Well, welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 5 of Prince Caspian, Caspian's Adventure in the Mountains.
Adventures out there.
Yeah, you're jumping right in there with your I'm Phil. You're excited, I guess.
I'm so ready for this.
This is another, we've been talking a lot about chapter titles. We had those first 3 chapter titles that were very ambiguous. We didn't know exactly what's going on. And these are just like, here's exactly what's going to happen. Caspian has this adventure in the mountain.
I'm not going to say what the chapter title is for those of you at home who are following along, but there is a title that just plain explains like a resolution to something that I accidentally saw when I was flipping through my giant copy of all the books put together. I was like, oh, I didn't want to know that.
Is it in Prince Caspian or is it
in Prince Caspian?
I'm excited to see what it is because I can't remember all the chapter titles. So
well, you've got most of them.
That's true.
Daniel has most of the titles memorized.
Well, we've just spent a lot of time with the book. It's not like
a lot
practice
of time.
Well, listeners, in our last episode, we left Prince Caspian as he was learning more about old Narnia. He was learning under the cover of darkness from Dr. Cornelius, his tutor. And we're going to pick up in chapter 5 here as some big events and revelations are revealed to Caspian. So any last thoughts, Phil, before we jump right in?
How do you feel about a Netflix spin-off series called The Tutors?
Spelled Tutors?
It's like it's about his nurse. It's about Dr. Cornelius.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, well, here's the chapter summary. I'm not going to respond to that. So here we go. Caspian is woken up by Dr. Cornelius, who quietly instructs him to pack his things for a long journey. He explains that the queen has had a son, and Miraz plans to kill Caspian, as he did his father. Before Caspian leaves, Dr. Cornelius gives him Queen Susan's horn, which should only be used in the utmost emergency. Caspian mounts Destrier and flees into the wooded mountains. His arrival in the forest is not welcomed by the trees, and Caspian is knocked unconscious. When Caspian wakes up, he is astonished to learn that he has been taken in by 3 real Narnians: Truffle Hunter, a kind badger; Nickabrick, a callous dwarf; and Trumpkin, the dwarf whom the Pevensies met on the island. Their reactions to his arrival are quite mixed. After a good deal of arguing, the 3 agree to take Caspian to meet the others who are in hiding.
Well done.
You like that one?
Yeah. Did you go over the limit?
148 or something like that.
148?
It sounds a little bit longer, doesn't it?
It does.
A lot happens in this chapter.
Maybe you had more syllables in some of those words.
Yeah, that's right.
Like Truffle Hunter.
Do you think as we get further into the show, we should not do a word limit here on the chapter summaries, but a syllable count on the chapter?
Something to think about.
Yeah. Well, Phil, what are some of the things that stick out to you before we really start to dive deeply into the text?
I love that we're getting new characters.
Okay.
And we also get a little bit of a glimpse of just how the children may have been called back into Narnia.
Oh, the foreshadowing,
awesome.
yeah.
When I read that, I was like, whoa. And I'm like reading by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, whoa.
Your roommates come check in. What's going on, dude?
What's going on, man?
Yeah, I had not really noticed that before, and I think because the story is so familiar, not as much as Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is obviously, but I do know the story. I think I was reading through one of the times, and I was thinking about, I wonder what Phil's experiencing as he's reading this, and I literally marked that part. I was like, I wonder if he's like, oh, maybe that's why they're here.
Right. That's exactly what happened. Also, I'm amazed at how much I don't remember, and I've had this book read to me before, and I've seen 2 different versions of movies
Sure.
from it, and I really had no idea what was going to happen in this.
Well, I think one of the things that stands out the most to me, and it goes along with what you were saying, is I really, really like this non-linear narrative. I'm still bought in. I know, I'm going to keep checking in at each chapter and like, how do I feel about this? Because we're now 2 chapters removed from the Pevensies on the island, but I'm still like, this is a great way to tell a story. I'm really liking it.
Yeah. I love having the break of, okay, we've been with these characters for a while and now we're in this time period. And I also love when something finally connects, you're like, oh snap, that's cool.
Yeah, it's a really great storytelling device. So the chapter begins and we hear about Caspian and his tutor and the different conversations they're continuing to have about Narnia. And we also learn about the subjects he's learning in the castle. And as all that's happening, Caspian starts to realize that something else is going on with the king and the queen, right? So one of the things that I wanted to notice before we jump into the birth of the new baby, I was doing some reading in the Narnia Code by Michael Ward, who we talked about in the last episode. And just to remind listeners, who I'm sure probably know more than we do anyway, but he has kind of uncovered this secret code to this series, which is that he believes C.S. Lewis wrote each of the Chronicles of Narnia with a different medieval heavenly body in mind. And do you remember what the one was for Prince Caspian?
Mars.
Yeah, so Mars, which is related to both the idea of war and also the idea of like woods and like forest trees. And I found this out as I was reading more of his book, which we'll have a link to it in the episode's description, because I want to, a lot of these ideas are his, so I'm not trying to take any credit for them. But at the same time, also, like, listeners, you should go buy and read this book. It's really, really good. There's another book called Planet Narnia, which is the more scholarly one. I'm reading the more layperson one, the Narnia Code. But in it, he mentioned something about the Queen, which I think we struggled through last time. Are we saying it's Pruna Prismia?
Pruna Prismia.
Pruna Prismia. She is actually named after a Charles Dickens character from the story Little Dorrit, and she's always saying the character's always saying prunes and prisms. Do you want to know the character's name?
Sure.
Mrs. General.
Oh, wow.
And it's like these are just kind of like the breadcrumbs that Michael Ward is pointing to and saying, look, there is some connection here. So I'm curious to see if you're getting more and more bought into this idea, if you still think it's kind of...
I am after that. That's pretty good.
That's the one that sold you on it, is... Okay.
But also, let me give you a sample of like what I get excited about when I went back and read this chapter for a second time, and they're talking about how the Queen seemed to be ill.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a great deal of bustle and the word pother, which I haven't used a lot, about her in the castle, and the doctors came and the courtiers whispered. Is that how you say that? The first time I read that, completely went over my head. But then once you find out that she just had a baby, you're like, oh, that's why she seemed to be ill.
Yeah,
I love little things like that.
Oh, it's cool because we get that from the perspective of Caspian, right? He's a kid. He's a kid. Like, how much is he really going to know? He's not going to know a ton about the pregnancy. It's, oh, there's a baby. Oh, now this is why my aunt was sick. And I like that we're shifting kind of to his perspective a little bit there. But
it's not super obvious, because he could have made it a little more obvious. Like, she was getting a lot of sickness
in the morning or something. Yeah. It's so Caspian is woken up.
He's woke. He remains woke.
He wakes up in the middle of the night by Dr. Cornelius after this has happened, and Dr. Cornelius is like, "We've got to go. Like, things are really serious." And Caspian thinks that, oh yes, we're going to go have another lesson about old Narnia, but the tone in Dr. Cornelius's voice is very, very serious. And he explains that, like, you've got to leave, right? And we find out, actually, I think I'm going to read about what Dr. Cornelius says, because he reveals a lot of stuff to Caspian here, which to us, we might have realized this in chapter 4, because, maybe we've read a lot of the books, you can kind of tell that Miraz is probably a bad guy, but it's here that Caspian gets that revelation, right? So I'm going to read this. I'm not going to do a voice because it's a long section of the text. But this is what Dr. Cornelius says to Caspian. After Caspian says, "What does it all mean? I don't understand." "I wonder you've never asked me before," said the doctor. "Why, being the son of King Caspian, you are not King Caspian yourself. Everyone except your majesty knows that Miraz is a usurper. When he first began to rule, he did not even pretend to be the king. He called himself Lord Protector. But then your royal mother died, the good queen and the only Telmarine who was ever kind to me. And then, one by one, all the great lords who had known your father died or disappeared. Not by accident either. Miraz weeded them out. Belisar and Uvalis were shot with arrows on a hunting party. By chance, it was pretended. All the great house of the Passerids he sent to fight giants on the northern frontier, till one by one they fell. Arlian and Aramon and a dozen more he executed for treason on a false charge. The 2 brothers of Beaver's Dam he shut up as madmen. And finally he persuaded the 7 noble lords, who alone among all the Telmarines did not fear the sea, to sail away and look for new lands beyond the eastern ocean, and as he intended, they never came back. And when there was no one left who could speak a word for you, then his flatterers, as he had instructed them, begged him to become king. And of course he did." That is some like Game of Thrones level world building there, kind of stuff going on. I've never read or watched Game of Thrones, but it seems like that's kind of what's happening, right? In this,
it starts off with 2 people getting shot by arrows.
Yeah.
So doesn't seem like an accident. Like if one person gets shot with an arrow, you stop shooting arrows for a while.
Yeah,
but then he kills
true.
12 people. And that becomes what I've heard Game of Thrones is like.
Yeah, this section to me is actually, I mean, the reason I chose this to read is like, I am actually like, how different is this than the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? This is a completely different world that we've come back to. And you're just like, what? Like all this kind of, these are like, these political maneuverings to try to get more power and stuff. Like this is not the world that we came into in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. This is like very, in some ways, this is kind of relatable. Like this is a very human thing. These aren't like animals just like fighting one another. These are humans manipulating and backstabbing and doing all these other terrible things. And this, to me, like this is great world building because I'm like, whoa, how different is this than the last one? Right. I also made a connection. I thought a lot about King David. After he's with Bathsheba, and then he sends out her husband right to the front armies. I thought about the same two people who went to go fight the house of the Passerids who go off and fight the giants. I don't know if there was an actual connection there, but just something that stuck out to me.
And he sends people on a journey and they never come back.
Actually, I'm not going to get too far ahead, but
they do come back. Come on.
No. But then the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, they will be kind of a little bit of the plot. There'll be some more about that. That's all I'll say.
So they didn't fall off the edge of the earth.
It's funny you should say that. I'm not going to say anything else.
I'm getting like little glimpses of
little glimpses
of what I may have seen.
So it's interesting also that after Caspian hears this, you would kind of think, you and I would think, oh, he's definitely coming for Caspian next. But Caspian even asks, like, wait, do you mean he wants to kill me too? Like, he seems like he's still kind of confused about this, that Caspian, I don't know if he's just naive or if he's young, but he doesn't seem to just all of a sudden want to be like, well, great, now we've got to take over myself. Like his first step after hearing this is not, well, then I need to go become the rightful king, is it?
Right. Which shows how different he is from his people.
I mean, he's a good king. He doesn't seem to want power for the sake of having power.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we can explore more as we go through the text. And it's really important here. Dr. Cornelius also mentions that he murdered your father, right?
And what a great reaction. Caspian felt very strange and said nothing. That's exactly how you receive that kind of information.
Yeah, he just doesn't really know how to react to it. That's exactly right.
Because he obviously didn't know that. But it all makes sense given the content that he just heard.
I mean, yeah, I can imagine. I mean, he's this boy who's all of a sudden, the only family you have left probably want to kill you, and your father was murdered by your uncle. I mean, all of this stuff is like, this is pretty dark, right?
Yeah. And later on, like his uncle actually reveals that he is his father.
That's not true. I mean, you don't know, but... So one of the interesting things that happens is as Caspian's leaving, he's handed, this kind of purse with some money in it, but also the horn of Queen Susan. This is what you were talking about earlier, where he's like...
Queen Susan's horn. It still sounds weird, I guess. It sounds like she had a horn.
Oh, yeah. It was like on her head or something.
They removed
it. And Dr. Cornelius doesn't actually know what it does. And that's so cool. He's like, maybe it brings them back here from the past, or I don't know. This is really cool. He says this: many terrors I endured, many spells that I uttered to find it when I was still young. And that, like, to me, that's the Netflix series I want to see. Like, if we're going to do prequels, I want to go see Dr. Cornelius trying to find this horn and go after. Like, that could just be like a little mini series, like 2 or 3 episodes, right? Or something. That's the kind of stuff where I do think if Netflix is going to take stories outside of the quote unquote canon of the 7 books, like that's the kind of stuff, like small things that don't really affect. I don't want to see, Prince Caspian when he was 5 years old. I don't want to see our main characters, but I could see like a secondary character like Dr. Cornelius going after this horn. That could be fun, right?
Yeah, that'd be cool.
So Caspian mounts his horse and he decides to leave the castles with the backdrop of fireworks to celebrate the arrival of the new prince. And I think you have the section you're going to read here.
Yeah. All night he rode southward, choosing byways and bridle paths through woods as long as he was in country that he knew. But afterwards he kept to the high road. Destir was as excited as his master at this unusual journey, and Caspian, though tears had come into his eyes at saying goodbye to Dr. Cornelius, felt brave and, in a way, happy to think that he was King Caspian, riding to seek adventures, with his sword on his left hip and Queen Susan's magic horn on his right. But when day came, with a sprinkle of rain, and he looked about him, and saw on every side unknown woods, wild heaths, and blue mountains, he thought how large and strange the world was, and felt frightened and small.
You know, to me, this is Caspian's first real entry into Narnia. Now, obviously, I'm sure he's probably been around. He says, you know, he knows some of the country, but this is, he's finally taken off, you know, maybe his blinders or whatever you would have, and he's really seeing Narnia for the first time. And I want to compare this to Lucy when she first enters Narnia back in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So here's what C.S. Lewis writes in chapter 1 of Wardrobe. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. You know, she had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it was a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. I just had to include that last part. But what I want to focus on...
It's tradition.
Yeah, is the feeling of both Caspian and of Lucy. So Caspian, it says, you know, that at first he's really excited, but then as he wakes up, he feels frightened and small. And it's almost like he's kind of got the tension of two things. Caspian, at this point, to me, it seems like he's mostly afraid and he feels small, but there is this idea in the back of his mind of this is exciting, right? Because he is fleeing for his life, but look where it's taking him, and there's just this open road ahead. And for Lucy, I feel like it's the inverse of that, where she's a little frightened, but she's more excited and inquisitive, and that's kind of what's taking her. So this is like the opposite of what first brought us into Narnia. Now it's like the inverse of that. Yeah. And I think that's really, really cool. And again, I think in a lot of ways, Lewis is subverting the narrative. Like, this is such a different book than The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I think, I sound like a broken record, but I wonder if this is why so many people maybe don't resonate with this book as much as the first one. I'm not saying it's better than The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but it's just so different that if you read these in publication order, it's a big shift from the last, like from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to this. This is not the sequel you thought you were going to get.
But in a lot of ways, I think it works. Are you familiar with the concept of the uncanny valley?
Yeah, like with like CGI and stuff?
Yeah, so the closer something gets to reality, if it gets too close, it actually causes this weird feeling because it's not exactly right. Mm-hmm. So like they'll have like a animation of a person talking.
Like Tarkin in Rogue One.
Right, and like it's so close to looking just like the real thing, but our brains like kind of pick up on all the little things that aren't, but we can't quite say that's what it is. Yeah. So like it creates this weird feeling. I think that if he had written Wardrobe again and like just changed a few things, so like made a few differences, he'd be like, oh, this isn't quite as good. Like I see that he's trying to do the same thing, but it's not as good. This is so different. It's 1,000 years later almost. Yeah. It's like a completely different set of people. You have some characters who are animals that can talk, but like there's only a few of them. There's not an entire world of them. And I love that he's like, well, I'm going to make it really different, but there's still a few things that connect it.
And listeners, this would be a great place. We would love to hear from y'all to know what you think of this book. You know, we hear from some people, oh, this is not really one of my favorite books. If you really like this book a lot, like if this is one of your favorites in the series, like please let us know. I would love to know, you know, why people enjoy it, because it is one of the more, you know, quote unquote not controversial, but it's usually not in people's top 3, right? So if it is, I'd love to know why you enjoy it so much. And if it isn't, what is it about this book that just doesn't do it for you? I really would love to know. We would love to share some of those in the podcast as well too. So this is a great kind of plug for...
We actually read the stuff that we get.
We're not great at responding quickly because I don't check the email super often, but we will respond when we see.
We kind of binge it.
Yeah, exactly. So as Caspian and his horse continue through the forest, something really interesting happens, and I want to hone in here. And so I'm going to read a paragraph or two. And now they entered a dark and seemingly endless pine forest, and all the stories Caspian had ever heard of trees being unfriendly to man crowded into his mind. He remembered that he was, after all, a Telmarine, one of the race who cut down trees wherever they could, and were at war with all wild things. And though he himself might be unlike other Telmarines, The trees could not be expected to know this, nor did they. Ooh. We'll come back to that. The wind became a tempest. The woods roared and creaked all around him. There came a crash. A tree fell right across the road just behind him. "Quiet, Destrier, quiet," said Caspian, patting his horse's neck. But he was trembling himself and knew that he had escaped death by an inch. Lightning flashed, and a great crack of thunder seemed to break the sky in two just overhead. Destrier bolted in good earnest. Caspian was a good rider, but he had not the strength to hold him back. He kept his seat, but he knew that his life hung by a thread during the wild career that followed. Tree after tree rose up before them in the dusk and was only just avoided. Then, almost too suddenly to hurt, and yet it did hurt him too, something struck Caspian on the forehead, and he knew no more.
I love that it sounds like it wiped his memory, and he got hit
You think?
really hard.
I mean, man, I honestly think what I just read is probably my favorite section so far of the whole book, to be honest. I mean, we have the personification of the trees here is just, they feel alive, right? That sentence gets me when it says, "The trees could not be expected to know this, nor did they."
Yep.
Man, whoa, that is
second
really cool.
line makes it so much more serious. Also, the way the trees just keep rolling up into view, like you can tell how fast he's going just by that description.
And what's really cool about I mentioned it as personification, but there's also the idea that the trees are kind of alive, and so I don't even know, is that personification at this point if they are real living characters and things no, they're like these magical trees and stuff. And so also in this section there is a relation to both kind of things that Mars is associated with. If we think back to Michael Ward and the theory of the Narnia Code, right? So Destrier is actually, which is the name of Caspian's horse, is actually a type of war horse, right?
That's cool.
And so as this is all happening, as this war horse is going through the woods, right, the trees seem to literally be coming alive. And another name for Mars is actually Mars Sylvanus. And Silva means, in Latin, it means woods or forest. And here the trees are really almost seeming to become their own character. And so this section is both a combination of the war and trees. And I'm telling you, the more I read this stuff, guys, go buy this book if you have, or just watch I think you can rent the movie on YouTube. I'm starting to become a believer, man. I really am.
In the Narnia Code.
And I don't know. I'm gonna be honest. When someone first told me about this, I didn't roll my eyes, but I went, okay, that's a cool theory. And now I'm more like, maybe this is more than just a theory.
That's a cool theory.
Yeah. I was like, this is a really cool theory. There's some stuff that just lines up really, really well. Yeah.
So let's talk about the what happens in the woods here.
Okay.
Because I want to run some stuff by you. Do you think the woods are controlling the weather at all?
That's a great question.
What's your gut reaction?
No.
Yeah, my gut reaction is they're not. So is the weather just really bad?
Sure. Right.
Okay. And so he probably shouldn't be riding.
Well, he's got to escape with his life.
Yeah. I wonder if he's far enough away, he could probably stop, take shelter or something.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if the trees are you know what, this guy doesn't get it, and they slap him in the forehead, take him down.
Well, that's a great question. Do you think, I know I'm just kind of turning the question back to you. Do you think Caspian runs into a tree, or does a tree hit him?
At first I thought like a slingshot or something, because I knew that we had some characters that were going to be introduced soon, because they had to be.
Yeah.
We're running out of characters.
Yeah.
They keep getting killed off somehow, like arrows and to fight giants and stuff. But the forehead thing, I was like, okay, he got hit by something, someone threw something at him. And then I was like, okay, he just ran into something. And then I'm like, now I'm kind of wondering, did the trees intentionally hit him? Which I think is what we're supposed to think. But I'm wondering what their motivations are. Because it sounds like they may just be mad, and that could just be it.
Yeah, I mean, it says, nor did they. They didn't know that Caspian was a quote unquote good Telmarine. So they just see a Telmarine and they're like, we know what y'all have done, right? And so this is kind of their reaction to a Telmarine coming through their forest. I think that's what's happening.
Okay.
Now, whether or not, I'm not completely sold that a tree has actually come down and hit him in this instance, as much as maybe he really did just run into it on his own.
It seems pretty likely.
Yeah, it sounds like you're more on the other side. Yeah.
it seems like there's a lot of trees. Like he could just hit him. I thought they knew that this was Caspian himself and they hit him intentionally, but it sounds like they just saw a human, figured he was probably a Telmarine because that's the majority of them or all of them in the area at the moment.
I think we're led to believe that it's only Telmarines in Narnia, right? As far as humans go. I think so. So then Caspian wakes up, right? And just like the beginning of the chapter where he's woken up by Dr. Cornelius, he's now woken up, but it's by 3 very unlikely people. Who are they?
Well, one is Truffle Hunter.
Yeah?
I think just based on the name alone is probably going to be one of my favorite characters. And Knickerbrick. Knickerbrick is, he's just saying what everyone else is feeling.
You think so?
He's just being honest, man.
Yeah. And then you have Trumpkin, right?
Yeah. How would you describe Trumpkin?
He's kind of between the two, right? So like
a good mediator.
I don't even know if he's a good. I mean, he's very. He's not optimistic about the situation. I mean, he even mentions. So they wake up and Truffle Hunter's kind of like, we've got to decide what to do, and Knickerbrick's like, let's just kill it. Like he's and Trumpkin's more like, well, I mean, if we were going to kill it, we shouldn't have taken it and taken care of it. Like he's not necessarily against the idea of killing Caspian, but it's more of look now it'd be kind of weird to do it now. We already took care of him. Like we should have just already done it. So he's not necessarily like, oh yeah.
Now he's a guest. Just like it would be rude to murder him.
Exactly.
Like, it would be rude to murder him anyway.
So I think in some ways maybe he is more of the peacemaker a little bit. I don't think it's because he necessarily wants to care for Caspian. It's more just like he seems more like he's just realistic about the situation.
Yeah. So he'd be like a number 9
on the Enneagram. You mean? We're not getting into that. So we learn that Caspian's horse has run away as well too, and we get one of our. I told you to keep an eye on these, right? We get one of our expressions, horns and halibuts, right? Did this for you? Did this signal to you? Wait, this is the same dwarf that we met in chapter 3.
No,
we haven't learned his name yet. Remember, he had an expression like that in chapter.
Yeah.
And I asked you to keep.
I did
an eye
put a
on
little
that.
note. I was like, language.
Yeah, you think that's some kind of like curse word in his language?
Yeah, it's probably really bad.
I don't think so. I think that what he's just doing is he kind of puts 2 seemingly random things together as kind of his substitute for.
It's just alliteration.
Yeah, I mean that's what it is. This is something we should do whenever we have a guest on for a second time. We should ask them like, what would your exclamation be? Yeah, what are 2 random things you'd put together? Maybe next time, Phil, you can come back and tell me what it would be.
Give me a few.
Yeah, give me a few.
I did have a friend who grew up in another country speaking another language, and people were trying to figure out like what are some like bad words in your language. And it was so funny to watch them go like, oh, I really shouldn't even say this. And then like say the word. And to us, it means nothing.
Yeah.
So I think context is a big thing. So like these aren't bad words to us, but
I don't.
Trumpkin, man. Like, watch your mouth. No,
I disagree. I do not think he is using like inappropriate language. I think this is just the way he's exclaiming, like "Oh my goodness" or "Wow." This is just. I could do the whole interjection song from Schoolhouse Rock. I used to teach that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's his way of showing excitement or emotion that's generally set apart from a sentence by an exclamation point, or by a comma when the feeling's
that was
strong.
well said.
Yeah. So. We learn more about the 3 of them, and I think it's cool that we have quite a mixed reaction to Caspian, because to me this makes sense, right? Caspian is a Telmarine, and what that represents to these old Narnians is it could be death. Like, we don't know a ton about Knickerbrick yet, right? What it seems, he doesn't necessarily right now seem to be any kind of like, evil bad guy, just more of a, every time your people came around, it meant death for our people. So he's like, there's this kind of already this idea of what Caspian is. Truffle Hunter, and we don't know if he's just being naive right now or not, seems to want to care for Caspian, even if he is this evil Telmarine, which they're not sure about now. And Trumpkin's more just in the middle, right?
Yeah. I love Knickerbrick's reaction when Caspian says that Miraz is his uncle. Knickerbrick just jumps up, has his dagger out. He goes, "There you are, not only a Telmarine, but close kin and heir to our great enemy." He's so upset. Everything to him is just evidence that he's right.
Yeah, he's a really interesting character, and I think it would be fun for us to kind of compare him to Trumpkin, because they're similar. We know they're 2 different types of dwarfs, but they are similar in a lot of ways. Like, it's even funny. Nickabrick is so upset with Dr. Cornelius. Like, he's he's only half dwarf, so we don't like him. I mean, this is like some kind of complex stuff we're getting into.
Yep.
Like,
which I think makes stories in general more realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot about futuristic movies.
Okay.
The ones that are really good have a lot of complexity to them, but they're not beating you over the head with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's when they separate things into two groups and make the like reasons for those two groups like super, super obvious that it feels a little forced. But this, like the complexity with like someone who's a half dwarf and just like there are two different types of dwarves that were introduced to here.
Mm-hmm.
That just shows how well crafted this world is and how more thought out it may be than some people would suspect.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's really interesting to me to see the way that both of them react to it. And I kind of understand where they're both coming from, right? Like, so the more we learn about them, I'm going to change my feeling. But right now in this chapter, I'm like, I could see why Nickabrick would feel this way. In a lot of ways, like the old Narnians are kind of at war, right? With the Telmarines. The Telmarines seem to believe they've already won the war and it's over, but we know the old Narnians, as we find out by the end of the chapter, that they're going to see, right? They still exist. They're just in hiding. Yeah. So
like
to them, this is like
resistance or rebellion.
Yeah, to them, this is just we've captured like a prisoner of war, right? Or like we captured an enemy like on
and a high up one too.
Exactly. So like you kind of understand where Nickabrick might be coming from, but you also understand why Trumpkin might feel like, oh well, we already took it in, so now he's just our prisoner. And we hear that, I think it's Nickabrick that says that. Well, now we're just going to keep him alive forever because we definitely can't let him go, right? Like, and it's interesting to me because Truffle Hunter, who seems to be the nicest guy, does seem to be a bit naive here, right? Like he's like, well, we should let him in and we should, take care of him. And, we know that he's our king, right? Like, which is just interesting. And there's that really cool line where Trumpkin's like, he's whistles and whirligigs again. He's like, you're going to give our country to the humans. And the Badger's response is like, no, it's not their country, but it's their country to be king of, which seems that he actually has probably the best understanding of the situation more than the dwarves. And he's kind of let his emotions, he's kind of pushed them to the side to be like, this is actually the right thing to do.
Right. And he also, I think, kind of checks his pride
Mm-hmm.
a little bit, which is a good trait in this case, in a lot of cases.
I mean,
also, before we get too far, let's talk about what Trumpkin threatens Nickabrick with.
Yeah.
Do you really want Truffle Hunter and I to sit on your head?
Man, why did we not get an illustration of that by Pauline Baines? That's
right.
The one I want to see.
It's probably in the on the cutting room floor.
You think it's somewhere? She just was like, no, it looks weird.
We got to find that. We should do a Netflix miniseries about trying to find that.
If only one of the hosts of this show was an illustrator, that should have been the season artwork. It should have been
people sitting on Nickabrick's head.
Yeah, instead of just Truffle Hunter, it should have been Truffle Hunter and Trumpkin sitting on top of Nickabrick.
I don't know what this podcast is about, but I'm interested.
That's true. So, we hear that, Truffle Hunter's decided, he kind of wins out on the argument as far as we need to go take Caspian. He is the rightful king. We need to take him to meet the rest of the Narnians. Even though Nickabrick is not happy about this and Trumpkin seems pretty wary, that is kind of the argument that wins out, right? And so we finish the chapter with Caspian being taken by these three Narnians to meet the others, who still lived in hiding. I know we kind of went through that last section quickly. Is there any other thoughts you have about it?
Right at the end, it seems like we're on to another adventure.
Mm-hmm.
We just had a great adventure. Like he just rode through the woods that he's never really been through on his horse. But now it's like, now things are kind of picking up speed. That's exciting stuff.
One of the things I would like to know is, are you, in the next chapter, Prince Caspian is going to travel throughout the land meeting old Narnians. And I'm wondering if you are more interested in that. Like, if you had to choose, would you want to continue Caspian's journey right now, or would you rather get back to the Pevensies and find out what's going to happen?
Right now, I want to get back to the Pevensies.
Really? Okay. Yeah. Why?
I just like to go back and forth.
Are you itching to kind of find out what happens with them, or are you just like, oh, it'd be cool if we were going back and forth and back and forth?
I like a good back and forth pace.
So if you this could change.
Not every chapter.
Sure.
But I feel
that
like
was my
I'm
question.
Due. Yeah. I
so
feel
you
like I am now due for.
You would not
another dose of the Pevensies story.
So you would not want it to be every like an odd chapters Pevensies, even chapters Caspian, and eventually the story just goes on.
I think that can work.
Okay.
It worked pretty well in Gone Girl, but it is kind of distracting to get pulled out every single time, unless they're like very intricately connected or like the same time period. But these are different time periods.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm forgetting is that in this story within a story, like all of this is actually being told to the Pevensies. So I wonder.
Wow.
Yeah, remember? I wonder at what point they are like, wait, do they know his name is Trumpkin? I can't remember. I don't think so. They just call him the dwarf, right? Before we wrap up the chapter, I also want to point out that we had bulbs and bolsters. That was one of the other exclamations by Trumpkin that we didn't say yet. So the 3 we got in this chapter were horns and halibuts, bulbs and bolsters, and whistles and whirligigs. So we can kind of add that to the collection. All right, so next time we will be in chapter 6, the people, interesting use of the people that lived in hiding. And in that chapter, Prince Caspian travels throughout the land meeting old Narnians. If you'd like to follow us into Narnia on our Twitter and Facebook pages, you can search for The Lamppost Listener and find us there. If you have any feedback, you can email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. If you also would like to be as generous as to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, we would really appreciate that. It helps other people find our show. Our show's themes were created by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find more of his work in the links in the episode's description. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we'll be back next time with Chapter 6.